the staff and everybody here works so hard to hang the show, to install it, to announce it, to put it together, and we get so enthusiastic about what we're doing, but we're really doing it for an audience. It's you guys that make us feel good. It's you guys that we do the best job we can. We bring in tremendous talent, we think, we always hope. And when you come here, it validates what we're doing. You're the most important part of this gallery in a lot of ways. And it's nice because we often see the same faces in different talks. And now that we're sort of post-COVID, we will want to do this more and more and invite you into the gallery to share the resources that we have and to share the wonderful work that we have. And Barbara Cole has come with her husband from Canada, from Toronto, for a presentation. I don't know if this cut off. And we have Joyce Tennyson in the audience as well, who has been with the gallery for many, many, many years.
Over 20, I think.
Over 20, and continues to surprise us with new and different bodies of work. This is a three-person exhibition. The other part of the exhibition is Michael Messiah, who makes these magically beautiful prints that are black, using different inventive ways of working. He was inspired by Ajay, and he is kind of a poet of the night. And there's a whole new body of work in the office, which is really beautiful. Generally, there are people that sort of come late in the presentation, so what I thought in a video that goes with Barbara's book, and it really gives some sort of background and answers some of the obvious questions you'll have about who she is, how she makes her work, and why she makes the work that she makes. So it's 8 minutes. I'm going to play that now, and then we're going to go through a slide deck, and there's 2 shorter videos. One of a shadow dancing series, which are composite images, which was really sort of my initial attraction to Barbara. And it explains the technique. I want you to think about this when you look at the show, and you look at Joyce's work, Michael's work, Barbara's work. This is an age where people are taking pictures on their phones. They're instantaneous. They're uploading them with absolutely no effort. Pictures are broadcast and go around the world. This is anachronism to have 3 photographers here that absolutely painstakingly create work, take chances, take risks, are always experimental, and when they finally figured out how to do something, they drop it, and they move to something else to do. Because in their soul, they're always yearning to say, what more could they do? They give 110% to every image in here, and in an age where it's easy with technology to make images, these are not the images that interest them, and this is not what they create. So let's start with this 8-minute video. Let's see. My technology is, bear with me.
I got you, Holden. Here.
That is such a horrible picture.
My earliest memory of photography is from my Uncle Bill, who I've dedicated this book to. He had this, I suspect it's a Polaroid camera. The surface was really textured. It was like a brown and black and white, and you could see the way the varnish kind of was irregular on the surface. And I thought it was magic. I started becoming a photographer in the early 70s when I was working at the Transcends newspaper. That was my schooling. So I had just started that journey. I think I was maybe 2 years into it when I bought a book called Improbable Memories by Sarah Moon. And I was blown away. It was photography like I'd never seen. It was photography as a motion. It was like a mini motion picture with all the elements in one frame. And I was just dumbfounded that you could do that with a photograph. and thought, this is what I want to be. This is how I'm going to do it. And I wasn't ever really interested in shooting a photograph per se. As a document, I found it too literal for me. I needed something more abstract. And I realized that I could do this. I couldn't paint, couldn't draw per se, but this was an art form I could use to express my emotions, to express my feelings. And so I've always taken that approach. I always alter it. Even my digital pictures are hand painted. When I started using Polaroid film, that was my first way of making my photographs less literal. The film had a real creaminess to it, or a lack of gradation. So things were either black and white, which is very much like my personality. And I got pictures that were they looked very much like oil paintings. When Polaroid, the company, ceased to exist, I was devastated. And I was left with this sad feeling of how can I continue, how do I see going forward? And I had recently put a pool in my backyard, and from the very first roll of film, I knew that I'd found a way of manipulating the image so that it was more painterly again, and I was off for the next 25 years exploring that. But when I'm in the water with my model, it's just them and me. And we're both cold, and we're both wet, and we're both struggling with our, breathing. But it's just her and I. We become a we, which is a beautiful thing. It just becomes a group experience and a collaboration rather than me demanding or asking or, Between worlds is kind of where I've situated my entire practice. It's between reality and abstraction. It's the figure and the dissolved figure. It's, in a literal sense, how I sometimes use my above water backgrounds with my underwater pictures and blend them together. When I was first approached to do the book, I assumed they just wanted the underwater work from 2002 to now. And they said, no, we want everything. Then I was very excited. I thought, wow, someone's going to put all the different selves of Barbara together in one package, and let's see what that looks like. This book has created a through line for me from beginning to end. I now understand how they're all connected. I am all those parts, the black and white, the Polaroid, the underwater, the collodion, and I'm not afraid to change, which is a gift. Because photographers or artists, they find their sweet spot and they continue going in that direction. And I've always been someone who has a sweet spot and then goes somewhere else. How I got into wet collodion work was film was becoming a thing of the past. All the ones that I chose kept being discontinued. And wet collodion, you make the film yourself. It can't be discontinued. It's like making a cake. If you have the ingredients, you've got your collodion film. And that really attracted me. So I wanted to go back and respect the founders of this wonderful thing that we do. It was the most difficult thing I've ever done creatively in my life. Every time I shot, there was a new problem. And instead of making me feel defeated, I just felt more invigorated to figure this out. I had to get to the end because I knew the end would be great. Just as I felt like maybe it's time to shoot Tri-X, black and white film, ready-made, I got a good shoot. And since then, I've got it. It's like I can now bake that wonderful cake. It's very tactile, so it's like, it's like a sculpture you're building. Photography was critical for me to be well. I struggle with depression, and I've always, ever since I was a little girl, made things. Birthday cards took an entire weekend for me. I was just so lucky to have found photography as an expression, as an outlet for me, because I never realized until I started shooting how much I depend on it to keep me sane. The luck of the draw was that I got involved in photography, and from that moment on, my life opened. I would walk around with my camera, and it was the barrier between me and real life. You know, it allowed me to just experience things at my own pace and at the range I felt comfortable with. So I had this yearning to be in the studio more and really take the time I need to explore what I want to say above water. The last thing my uncle said to me before he passed away, and I told him this dilemma. What do I do? You know, my underwater work is so popular, but I feel like I need to move on. And he looked at me and he said, I think you should do it. You know, and that just helped. So I'm doing it. I have a very clear and excited view of what's to come now. And it's very scary for an artist not to know what's next, because you've been inspired for so long and suddenly it's like taking a Polaroid away. You know, now we're taking the water away. Well, who am I then? You know, what do I have to say on dry land? And yet I realize there's a lot to say still. And this medium is like, has no boundaries. You know, you can do this and continue exploring it and pushing and learning forever. And I think that it's just a wonderful life. You know, I would recommend it to anybody.
All right, so I think that's a good introduction, Barbara. I think we're going to go through some stacks of images, and impromptu we'll talk about your images and how they're created and why you create the images that you do, and you know, how you kind of live through them. So, let's see, next picture is
So
early.
this picture is after I was working at a newspaper for 10 years. I decided, they gave me a sabbatical, and they gave me 3 months to do whatever I wanted, and everybody chose something else. I chose to make an art show, and I felt like I was ready for that. And so this picture, the beauty contestant, was from my very first art show at the Jane Portman Gallery in Toronto. And this particular picture she wouldn't hang because she just thought it wouldn't ever sell. And so the compromise was we would leave it against the wall, and of course it sold. And this is a good example of early on how I felt that I didn't want to just use film in a documentary sense. I just wanted always to alter it, and I felt that I couldn't draw at that time. And it was, I feel like it's so important for me to have a different kind of feeling of actual photograph. Oh, I'm sorry, I don't know why my phone's ringing. It's turned off. Okay, well, it's just ignoring. The digital age, right?
Can you, when you look at this with the model and stuff, maybe it's helpful to give a little background about how you, every photographer got into photography different. Except some were born knowing, I'm going to be a great photographer, I'm going to work at this, this is my, you know, this is my passion, which has become your passion, but how did you develop into a photographer?
Purely by accident. I was going through school, I was in high school, and I had an aptitude test, and they told me I should be a librarian. And, you know, this is a very exciting future. So I dropped out of school, and in grade 12, oh, I'm so sorry. My phone is not with me, so I can't turn it off. But I dropped out of school.
We don't hear it.
No,
okay.
we don't hear it. It's okay.
Here it is.
Yeah, we don't hear it.
Okay, well now we know. And for the, you know, I dropped out of school due to depression. I didn't just decide I had enough of school, but I dropped out due to depression. Gave myself a year to sort of figure it out, and during that time, I took up modeling, and so that was just a fluke that I ended up modeling for this new paper called the Transcends that had just started off from the ashes of another paper that died called the Telegram. And I worked with this fashion editor, Joe Sutton, who I also dedicated the book to, was a wonderful inspiration. And she must have seen something in me, and I was 17, and she wrote me this long letter about 4 months after I worked for her on copy paper, you know, the roll of paper. It was like this is long, I'm not joking. Offering this, you know, shy 17-year-old girl the opportunity to travel the world, go to shows in Paris, Milan, London, do weekly fashion spreads for the newspaper, and be a fashion editor. And I thought she was crazy. And who's going to turn that down? Go back to school to be a librarian. So, so that was the beginning of it. And I started at the Toronto Sun as a writer and fashion writer. And then I, 10 years later, left to do some artwork. Then I realized quickly that I could go back to the Sun and continue being a fine art photographer. It just was not a good mixture. So I opened my own studio and I began to shoot television commercials, direct television commercials. And then, you know, as I said, I just kept growing and exploring. So I'd get ideas that I would have to figure out. So it was kind of like learn as you need to, you know, figure it out as you go along. But it was the most wonderful thing because I really never would have taken this path.
Can we then take a look at some of the early color work, and you can tell us how you sort of work? This is early.
This is very early. This is Polaroid. It's 1980.
And Joyce also has a huge career in Polaroid and chosen to work with Polaroid huge equipment because there's very little equipment. It's very, very expensive. Photographers that know what to do, have an expressionistic sense of that they can push the limits, that they can create artwork that's really, really beautiful with a photographic basis.
And I loved, as I said in the video, I just loved the creaminess of this. I would make a distinction. Joyce actually got a brand and she was a beautiful format camera. I just picked up cameras, and my husband was so supportive of me. And at this point, he found this Polaroid Spectra camera that had film that just shot at the front of the camera. And I used it as a piece of, you know, equipment to make very saturated, very colorful paintings. I want to begin to make my photographs look very, very painterly. And I experimented with, in the studio, I experimented with what kind of lighting I could combine to this instant Polaroid camera that would allow me to change it in some way. And so this series was very early on. It was in the 80s. And done with this technique. So this is part of the series.
Barbara, would you mind holding your mic a little closer to your mouth? Someone online was just asking.
Yeah, very hard to
Can you hear me?
Perfect, thank you.
And a picture like this, you know, sort of Sheila Metzner comes to mind.
Yes.
Were there, you know...
She wasn't shooting when I did this.
Oh, wow.
No,
But being
Sheila.
a female photographer in queer photographers, you and Joyce, in a sort of male-centric world, what was it like, and who did you aspire to be like, other than Sarah Moon?
No, I wanted to be Sarah Moon, not like Sarah Moon. She was everything. I've never met her, I've never corresponded with her, but she embodied she explained to me what is possible, what you could do with a photograph. I had no conception at all that photography could be art like that. I was always thinking it was just a document that you shot to remind you of something on a vacation. So she, for sure, was my influence. Of course, also, there was Deborah Turbeville, but her photographs were raw. I didn't connect as deeply with Deborah Turbeville. There was Dominique Hisserman later on, who did some absolutely hauntingly beautiful pictures in the fashion photography realm. Of course, Joyce Tennyson, who did these incredible huge format Polaroid pictures, and I felt a kinship. Also, it was wonderful to see women working in this business, because when I was at the paper, everybody was a man. And they just didn't get me, and I didn't get them. And I had, it was hard to find somebody who could understand what I was doing. And as an artist, you want people to understand it. You want people to get what you're doing. I didn't objectify women. They were kind of embodiments of myself or what I hoped I would do in a situation. So it was definitely told from a female perspective, and that was, and I learned from Sarah and Deborah and all those people, just how different the female eye is to the male eye. And it's not a joke, it really is so different. Even if there's another person on the bottom who does, he was before me, I didn't know that, Howard Schatz, and his pictures and my pictures are completely different.
If we look at a picture like we're looking at, can you tell me about, sort of the nice thing is people say everything you've done before in your life can prepare you for what you're doing now. There is a sense of understanding how a model moves from being a model.
Yes.
There is a great interest in fashion.
Mm-hmm.
There is a great interest in the history of design. So when you create a picture like this, what goes through your mind?
Oh, I'm very happy, very fulfilled. What goes through my mind? I think if I can hit the emotion, that makes me very happy. I can take, thousands of pictures and have a very successful shoot and throw them all in the garbage later, literally, because I don't feel it. It has to evoke a feeling in my heart. And when I come to a picture that I'll actually post, it's because I feel like there is a person in there. There's you sense her personality, you sense her emotion, and maybe even a bit of the struggle, that we all have in life. It just comes out differently with everybody. But so that's a successful picture in my mind.
So the use of color early on.
Well, this was done in the middle of my underwater career, and I was just having some fun. There was a designer who was doing watercolor paintings on fabric, and we really played. I actually dressed a mannequin, and so that's not real flesh and blood person. We put on, I use wigs a lot, so it doesn't really matter. I don't show faces, so it doesn't really matter. And we did a Mardi Gras feeling, and just had a blast. Somebody was at her feet, she was floating waterlogged in the pool. We were playing around with that. And
early work here?
And this is Polaroid, and again, pushing Polaroid. Just creative, having some fun with it. I hired twins and took them on our subway system and put them in different situations. I have an older sister, and I guess that influenced the situations that I was, enacting with them. And I didn't leave it at just photographs there. I also videotaped them. I guess that's the right way to put it. Then when I went back to my studio, I plugged the video camera into my television screen, and I photographed also. This is an example of that, but I photographed that picture as it was displayed on the television screen in Polaroid. And it came out with all these wiggly lines, and I just loved it. They looked very stretched and Modigliani-ish. So it was, again, an experiment. I showed it to a gallery early on, and they discouraged me, and I'm sorry that happened. That does happen to artists. They go in with an unresolved body of work, and instead of getting the encouragement they need to go forward, they chose another body of work to show, and so I just felt that it wasn't worthless, I felt, and unfortunately, because it was very intriguing, and I'm sorry that it stopped. I should also mention with the Polaroid, if you go back one frame. Okay, so this is part of the series. When I shoot Polaroid, it doesn't harden. So Polaroid in this case is just that little camera that flips up the front, or the print that flips up the front of the camera. So it doesn't actually harden for 12 hours, I'd say, maybe a little bit longer. And after the shoot is over at 5 o'clock or whatever, I would then spend another 6 hours in the studio manipulating the surface with a cuticle tip, cuticle-like stick, and push the emulsions, the red, green, and blue, and white, around. And so those little bits of white and those wiggly lines, give it a bit of a, if you could see it full size, give it a real feeling of an oil painting. And when I showed this work at a painting gallery, people couldn't believe they were photographs, and it was that convincing. And it was such a beautiful medium, but you needed, I'm someone who goes to bed at 9 o'clock, and here I would be shooting all day, and manipulating till midnight, and it was hard. I was once on a commercial job using this technique, and at the end of 3 days, I realized I hadn't even slept. I cat-napped here and there, but my pajamas were still in my suitcase because I was shooting and manipulating and shooting and manipulating it. I'd rest for an hour or two in the night, because there was that window. But as a woman, you do figure these things out, and I learned to put my Polaroids in the freezer. So then I started traveling with a portable freezer like they do for heart transplants. And the hotels wouldn't let me put the freezer in their freezer because it was for an object, and it would. So I had this portable freezer that I kept in my bedroom at the hotel, plugged in, and it would keep on generating power every couple of minutes. You'd hear the motor turn on. So it was very crazy the lengths you go to make it work, but it was worth it.
Can we talk about Somewhere series? Because that's the latest, that's the book cover.
Yes, this series, there's a lot to say about it, because as you know, when you put clothing in water, it turns yellow and gets ruined anyways. So with my clothing and my fashion background, I always worked with designers since I had to buy the clothing, the costume anyway, so why not design it yourself and get what you want exactly. So a wonderful designer, Robert Daines, he works out of New York, did these designs. I gave him the colors I wanted and the idea, and it was wonderful. He sketched it out for me while we were on Zoom, and I'm going, maybe we'll do a feather boa, and it was really creative, really fun. And the idea was I always shot underwater with one model, and I wanted to challenge myself to do 3 at a time. And it doesn't sound like a big challenge, but it is, because you're both holding your breath. Everyone's got to be coordinated. So these models, the 3 of them, would have to come down underwater, smooth their clothing out, smooth their hair out, all at the same time, get the hair off of their face, and keep their eyes open, and pose, or not pose, but I wanted life and movement in the picture. So I'd say, pretend you're running away, or you're at a party in another room, but you want to go explore the castle's room in this area, and you're just kind of sneaking away and having some fun with your girlfriends and stuff. And so it was fun, but it was tough, because not everybody can hold their breath for the same amount of time, and not every model was as confident as the next. So to get a good shot with 3 women doing what I wanted, and with their clothing looking as, not looking beautiful, elegant, and flowing, and the motions and the arms being relaxed and comfortable was, let's just say I'm very happy it was digital.
Yeah.
The film would have bankrupted me.
Can you talk a little about the background? Because it's, they're amalgamated images. So can you talk about...
Well, this is an amalgamated image. This is the first of them. But of course, I wanted elegant, centuries-old backgrounds. So I went to Shutterstock, and I found these little pictures, little images. So I found what I wanted, where I felt these women should be. Then I had my digital retoucher take these images, we'd crop them. I would color correct them and change certain bits, take things in and out, and then I would send those backgrounds to China, and they would be printed on a soft felt and then sent back to me. So, in fact, these pictures are not of that. These are just the backgrounds that were amalgamated and cropped and color corrected. I'll get to the other thing next. But it's very important to put these women somewhere. And I had done it in Falling Through Time, an earlier series where I had taken 20 years earlier a whole series of backgrounds of parks in England, in London, that I never used. I just didn't feel that they were interesting enough to me. They didn't tell enough of a story, so I just put them away. And then I had this idea of the women falling through the water, gravity-less and elegant flowing, and I thought, wouldn't it be great to have some kind of Versailles garden? Right. And then I thought of making a background, but of course, in water, the backgrounds would get all rippled, or we'd be shooting the side of the pool or whatever. So, so I did that. I did them just as sorry, I lost my train of thought there. Sorry. So I did then I realized I had this old body of work that I got out, and from the very beginning of my career, I was worried about the longevity of prints, so I always put them in a storage facility that was humidity and temperature controlled. And I took these Polaroids out from 20 years ago, and they were perfect. So it was just amazing. So I could then scan them 20 years later, put them together with a current picture, and Falling Through Time was born. I have done 12 underwater shows, so each time is different. The next one I did was surfacing, talking about mental health in a beautiful way, kind of a supportive and uplifting way. But I wanted the women to be overwhelmed by the body of water. So I, in that case, decided that I needed to go to an ocean. So I shot the backgrounds in oceans and amalgamated the foreground. The women, actually I used a friend's pool because the dresses sometimes were very, very long, and I needed the depth. And then I just close cut those dresses, those women, and put them in the ocean, and could make the women any size I wanted, and the smaller, the more vulnerable the women seemed to be. So it was a dance back and forth.
And looking at the pictures, the sort of nice thing is that everything, all the different bodies of work that we're going to look at have kind of, they're expressionistic, they're subjective. They're really less interested in showing what something looks like than what something feels like, or your relationship to it. And you're using it as a way to express something very personal. And I think that's important as we look in the different bodies of work. And this work, the women, it's certainly those exotic backgrounds and that kind of elegance and that kind of out of range imagery that, we look at is like, it enhances that sort of dream kind of fantasy aspect. That you're stepping back from the world. You're not talking immediately about the world you live day to day. It's rather dreamlike, and it's reflective, and it's meditative, and it gives you room to look and to really sink into a picture and absorb the kind of potential for expression.
Yes, and what was very important for Somewhere was that the women were alive, and they were moving, and they weren't posing. They were actually interacting with the background and feeling very free and comfortable moving in that space. Otherwise, it's just a flashy picture and it's posy. I really needed these women to express themselves in space.
And this is surfacing. So the difference is surfacing came before, right?
Yes.
The work. And this is where you're using several. And this is
the ocean look.
And are they also combined images?
They are.
They are combined images. So the background is a bit, but it's less pronounced.
It's
so
less
it's
pronounced.
It's more about the swimmers. It's more about the.
Well, I felt I needed the bigger volume of water to give the women a sense of vulnerability, because it was about women floating to the top, kind of trying to, get win over their emotional struggles, basically.
So it really became sort of subjective and expressionistic.
Yeah.
So the photographs, the images are really images, but they're images that take you to a different place.
Yes, definitely. And you know, I think the most important feeling you should get from the water work, not that very much anything, but is the freedom, the lack of the world holding you down, the sense of gravitylessness, the way that you can just exist in the world without pressures and feel a sense of freedom that way. So that's what I was hoping I was doing with this work. That's my daughter, by the way. I use my daughter sometimes.
And Underworld series.
This was the very first series underwater. And finally, when I understood it,
Which is?
This is a diptych. And we were talking yesterday, Holden and I, about the cutting and putting it in two pieces. And I didn't actually realize this, but this is a film shoot. So this was pre-digital. So you used film cameras that you had to measure the distance from the subject, you know, with feet, and then you had to figure out how far your flash would go and that sort of thing. And the film was processed into what's called a contact sheet that divides your images into small frames. And so he said, what made you think of putting this into two pieces? And I realized that was the contact sheet. That was half of the image was, number 18, and the next one was number 19. But I didn't realize that at the time. So, and my evolution in, I know that I said collodion was terribly hard to do, but underwater was so hard. First of all, I realized I needed glasses, because sometimes I just didn't see things, so I got prescription goggles. Like I said, you had to measure things out to get the focus. So I know it was hard for me to measure everything underwater, was closer or farther than you logically would think it was. So I came up with this brilliant idea of a piece of string in bright green that would be 1 to 3 feet, and then hot pink would be 3 to 7 feet, And the first shoot worked out brilliantly, and then the second shoot, everything came back out of focus. And I couldn't understand why, except that it was cotton and it had shrunk in the water. Things like that. So I made some crazy mistakes. I didn't know about weight belts, and I had a heavy weight for my husband's, working out thing placed on my stomach. I didn't know that you could just have a weight belt. I didn't know about breathing tubes, so I had a garden hose. I just breathed the foot, and I thought it worked. Inches below the surface, it works. But not when you go a foot down, all of a sudden you get stuck in any area.
But I think you're sort of driven to create an image, and you have to find a way to do it.
Yeah.
And it's not the kind that you don't go out on the street with a camera and tell somebody, smile, look at me.
Yeah.
These pictures don't exist until you make them exist.
Yeah.
And I think that's the beauty about them. I want to show a 5-minute video now about these
The making
pictures,
of
the making of it, because they're very complicated, and they're a marriage of old technology and new technology. And she's the only one that does them. And they're ingenious, and they're really great metaphors for classic photography.
It's very hard to explain this process, so take this off and see if
You'll understand from here.
You good one? That's my dog.
I'm Barbara Cole, and I'm a fine art photographer.
I've never been
A realistic photographer. I have always shot emotions.
So at first I used Polaroid because of the lack of detail and the beautiful creaminess of colors.
Some wiggly lines there.
I went underwater because that allowed me to move a subject through water, like molasses that just stretched and pulled, and that was fantastic. Being an underwater photographer in Canada has its problems because it snows half the year. So my assistant and I were looking for what he always called a 1-2 punch. Something I can do when it gets cold.
And now I'm turning to collodion photography, which was the very first form of photography, and trying to make this turn of the century process into something modern by adding color to the tinting.
aluminum.
Something would go wrong because there's so much.
And you pour the film
There's
onto
cutting
the
film.
I use glass
The
now.
developer and fix. There's cutting your tin or cutting your glass. So it's just it's a magical process.
And I use hot lights. I use movie lights because it doesn't see certain colors. And it's very strong. You need a lot of light. The ASA is 0 on collodion film. I rarely show their heads or faces, but I always get hair and makeup done. It makes everybody feel better.
When I shoot the actual picture that's in wet collodion film, it's sepia. Then I ask the model to stand completely still. And I take out the black and white film and
The exposures are very, very slow.
in order to
sometimes 20
achieve
seconds.
this look, which is the collodion background and then the color on the front of the picture that is front mounted to the plexiglass. And it's got a very...
I just wanted to say that these pictures are made with 2 exposures. The background is collodion film. It's 4x5 camera, so you can actually, the film is in a plate holder. So you put the plate holder in, there's your collodion film, and then I take that out, ask the model to stand completely still, and then I put the 4x5 color film in, and then I try and match them up in Photoshop. That's sort of where we're going with that.
So I think that's stuff. But if we can go on now, and so that's how they're put together. If we can talk about them. This was maybe 4 years ago. We had a booth in Photo London, and this was my introduction to Barbara. She came by. She's very polite and very, She said, "Do you have a moment to talk?" She introduced herself. She said, "I think I have something that I'd like to show you." She was very complimentary. "I like your booth. I like what you have in here, and I'm a Canadian photographer." And when I saw, they were like mystery boxes. So what they're framed in black, and the black frame around them is almost like a camera box, and they're kind of metaphoric for. If you look at the process of wet plate, collodion prints, and tin types, and albumin types, it's a century-old process.
1860 began.
And that's when it started. And when people first saw photographic images, they had the power of being magical. They were spellbinding. They were stopping time, and they were a way of creating a moment that if you didn't have it, it would never be there again. But the interesting thing about it, and a lot of people that are really wonderful photographers experiment with old processes of making pictures. But she had married something very, very old to the contemporary images. That image has to be scanned and is a digital image and is printed at 30-40% opacity, so that you can see through the two. So she's creating this kind of ether magical space that was the kind of fascination and the love that people had for photography. And she's doing it by marrying technologies that are 100, 120 years apart. And the only one that I know that was doing it. And they're really kind of beautiful because all 3 photographers in this exhibition have a mysterious sense of being enchanted about light. Light is critical. Light is the ether of illumination. Light has an energy to it. And it's when painters that are expressionistic paint, it's the same kind of thing. The color, hue, saturation has an energy to it. And I think that the handling of light and the handling of space is really quite unique and quite beautiful. And it's something that Barbara spent, 10 years, 12 years developing, and she said her failure rate was huge. There was times where they just weren't working. Things weren't gelling. She was creating images that she said, they don't mean anything to her. They don't resonate with the kind of power in the evocative sense that she needed them to. So, and, I said, where did you get these backdrops? Where did you get these, strange sets? And
well, this is the thing. In Toronto, we don't have a lot of castles or interesting backgrounds. It's a fairly young city. So, and I always feel that it's so important to, every element in the picture needs to have a purpose. And I felt like these women have to be somewhere. Where are they? And so I went online again and I looked at where I had every shoot, you start to think about what will this one be about. So you find a background that intrigues you, even though you can't really see it. I know what it is, and that's where my inspiration for the picture comes. And so these were the ones that I sent to China to get printed as 8x10 backgrounds. So it needs a lot of resin up and then it gets printed. But it's again an abstraction of the idea of where I want this person to be situated. So for me, it makes a lot of sense. I think I've always used backgrounds since 1983. It's just a photographer early on said, why don't you ever crop in? And I never realized I hadn't. It's just, this is the way I see my pictures. So backgrounds gave me the power to be in a field of flowers or, a beautiful paneled ballroom or an elevator shaft, or in some cases, as you'll see here, just a planted tree on a sidewalk. And the shadows are cast no matter what. So it's very fanciful. But yeah, so
I think they're very beautiful too, that they're very loose. The backgrounds, you can't see exactly what they are. And the figure you don't, is always kind of, you're seeing somebody from the back, or you're seeing a partial figure. So the person doesn't have a direct identity. You're seeing a person that has the potential to be anybody that you want them to be, which I think is very important.
That's what I always strive for the anonymity.
And the textures, I think, are really, really beautiful. And that kind of play of light, because there is deep space within the two, because you have one surface that you're looking through to see the other, and the back is only black and white. There's no color to the back of any of the pictures. So the color is just in the front. So shadow creates one kind of space, and the construction of the picture creates a second space.
Yeah, and the picture, the color on the front of this picture is printed on the back of plexiglass. So that's what we're looking through. As if you're looking through my camera. You're getting the same experience that I'm getting, because I see a color image when I'm shooting. But in collodion, all you would get is sepia or black and white. I don't like the sepia so much, I make it black and white. And then, the color is just something that lifts it, something that makes it feel right for me. I don't know whether it's necessary, but I needed it for me. So that's what I did.
So after we've talked about this body of work, which is really, yes?
How does it get to be that large?
I scan both my plate, which is 5x7, and the color film, which is 4x5. I scan them digitally. So they're now a large file that can be printed in a large way.
So I want to go to another series, appearance series. And we don't have, because it's a 3-person show, I think this is the next sort of body of work that I'd like to experiment and to bring to the gallery. And Joyce has done similar work of these beautiful flowers in motion, but Joyce has a totally different technique of making them. The flowers are actually in motion and moving, and it creates that sense of the delicacy of nature and how time affects, objects. And you got
it's above water.
And water.
And mine are below water.
And yours are below water. So it's a kind of point where they touch, where you get this fascination. And I didn't want to I wanted to tell you, because there's so many different bodies of work, of Barbara's that they're not all the human figure. She's done lots of figures, lots of pictures that deal with abstractions, with objects, and then the flowers, which I think are really very, very beautiful. And it's a different use of taking an image, I'm making a tight image, expressionistic, opening it up sort of so that it becomes kind of a dreamscape.
And it just happened that these were done during COVID, but I had talked to my daughters a lot. I talked to them a lot about creative stuff, and as one of my daughters suggested, I try not to do a figurative show. So I said, if I can figure out how to do it, I will, but I'm not very good with still life. And then I realized underwater, these flowers, I made them into people. They became like I gave them British names, and they became my friends. It's kind of crazy, but that was the whole thing with the flowers, was making them figurative.
Last couple slides are beat series, so talk a little about that, and then there's a less than a 2-minute video that we'll end with, and then it's open up to questions.
The beat series, I really wanted, I use fashion so much, I wanted to really experiment with something very simple, so I just got oversized shirts. And I asked them, this was during COVID, and just after, and I asked them just to go into the water and move, do whatever they want, make it as free as they could, and just express that energy we're all getting to be part of the world again. And it was a really fantastic experience for me and for the model and for my sister. It was a very small crew, but we just had fun, and we got re-energized and revitalized to get back from COVID. We were all so happy that we could be together and just be creative. So
it's funny with artists, who had to take a break and figure out what else to do. There's you wouldn't have thought about it, but there's always pre-COVID and post-COVID work.
Yeah.
And it didn't work because they're responding to a world where you're not so free to go out and relate to it, so you have to find another way of engaging with it. And so I figured this would be a nice kind of poetic 2-minute little thing that she had done for anthropology, and then we'll open it up to questions. Then this is 1 minute 52 seconds, but I think it's a nice poetic way of ending the presentation. If it plays.
It's all about light. Light creates the magic. Underwater photography depends on light. I make abstractions, romantic abstractions. It's just the inspiration and the looseness of it. It's amazing what you can do, though. I've been swimming forever, and I loved watching people when I swam, or just looking at the patterns of light on the floor. So underwater, everything's muted. You're always finding something new and some new way of pushing it and distorting it underwater that you don't really get above water. It's kind of all interrelated, playing with things and getting the movement, getting the distortion, which is key, and the reflections always help. I find that they're like a flame on a candle. You can think and plan all you want, but until you get into the process and sort of explore it, nothing happens. There's just so many things you can do with water. It's amazing. You think you've done it, and you've gone to the end of the rope, and now it's just repeating yourself, and then you see something else that sparks an idea, and off you go again. It's just crazy. So I think I'll stay where I am right now. Keep it underwater.
Before you ask me again, I learned, think it over, what's what you wanted,
Sorry, we abruptly didn't let the music play. Thank you all for coming. We encourage you to stay to talk to Barbara if you have questions, or Joyce, who we're delighted to have here as well. So we'll take questions if there are questions.
Not really a question, but we have so many things in common. Yes. It would take a lot longer to describe all of those, but I thought it was interesting that all the women that had influenced you that you listed, I had met them all. Yeah, and I actually introduced Sarah Moon to Polaroid, and so that's why she started using the Polaroid camera. Yeah, and so it's, you know, there were just so many different intersections there, and
Yeah, I think it's an aesthetic, isn't it? They're just, some people see a certain way.
I do, and it used to be really awful to be, you know, in the art world to be called feminine, because supposedly then you were powerful, and I think a lot of us chose work that we loved doing, and we didn't think about it being feminine. And but it's really it's the reason I moved, and it was a great decision, from Washington D.C., where I was teaching at the Corcoran School of Art, because I had no audience, and it was an old boys club that had the power, and they really disliked my work, and they, you know, they called it weak, and they called it too feminine and lacking any power. And so I decided that after being depressed, of course, to hear all these things, that I should leave town. And it was really a very difficult thing for me to do, because I had worked on creating a very beautiful home that I had bought after the race riots, and that had dropped into a price range for me, but was in very much disrepair, and made it into my dream. And you know, so, and I had family that, you know, was not happy to see me go. And so the whole, but I felt that I really would die if I didn't leave, because I was being choked of any life force of not being able to show the work and find any positive
Well, the first thing
reaction.
is,
So
with
at any
that-
rate, you know, this is to be continued, but I think for those of us who are living now, you know, in a totally new realm, you know, where sexual identity has all shifted, and what's important in art has shifted, and it's a wonderful, I'm thrilled to be living long enough to see all of this happening, because, you know, so many people suffered from not being accepted,
you know,
in
you
many
take
ways.
it personally. You feel
Personally,
that
as well as aesthetically.
you don't realize that your work is good because it's not being accepted for reasons that you would never have thought, you know. I have two daughters who are 35 and 34, so 35 years ago, Steve and I named our daughters Charlie and Michael, just to get their foot in the door. Because as a photographer, a commercial photographer, I was getting feminine hygiene and little boys with, you know, red wagons for Dempster's bread, that sort of thing. And the guys were getting the big campaigns because their name was John or Michael or Charlie. So that was, I felt
Stephen Klein.
Pardon?
Or Stephen Klein.
Yeah, exactly. And so you do take it personally. You do feel like, as a woman, you don't realize that your work is acceptable because there are other forces that are created that don't let you win the awards or get the notoriety or the jobs, you know, that have nothing to do with anything but your gender. So
Yeah, no, it is.
we could go on and on about this.
Yes.
Any questions though specific about? Thank you, Joyce, for sharing that. And I think it's the interesting thing about photography is it's produced a lot of female photographers that are really, really impactful, really powerful, and really are written into the history books. So I think it threw roadblocks in their way, but those that survived and got stronger from the roadblocks and found ways to assert their individuality and had the strength to continue to come back and come back and come back and to believe in themselves really have left an indelible mark in the industry of image making. So, I mean, the things that have been stacked against you as a woman, but the women that have catapulted to the top have been made very, very strong, maybe tougher, and maybe there's some sadness to it, but they've certainly championed the medium of photography. So,
well, I think what happens is you learn to shoot for yourself. You don't
that's a good point.
look to other people for approval. You just do what makes you feel good, and that's a really positive thing that happens.
That you become it's something that it validates you, or if it's just an interest, you drop it.
Yeah.
But it's something that speaks for you, and it's your way of connecting with the larger world and making sure that you have something to say and you have the power to have a voice. This gives all three of the photographers here, that's their voice. Their voice is in the images that you're looking at that are on the wall.
And it's kind of like when a guy is walking around with a guitar on their back, and everybody approaches him, but that guitar is like the intermediary person that allows him to be personal, to be friendly to people. And for years, since I discovered the camera, I'd always walk around with the camera. And that would just be, on board, I look for pictures, or somebody comes up because they're like-minded and they want to ask about what I'm doing, or what they're doing, or what camera it is, that kind of thing.
And now it's a cute dog. You walk around with a cute dog and everybody comes up to you and wants to engage in your world. So it's you find a means of engagement.
That's it, yeah.
Any other questions? Yes?
How do you pick your models? You mentioned using your daughter. Do you look for something very specific to what you plan to do, or do you have models you use over and over and you create them into what you need?
Before every session underwater, every season underwater, I do an open call, calling dance studios and people who wanted to work with me, as well as modeling agencies. And I have them come down and do an underwater casting. Because, for two reasons. One, everybody says they can swim, and they can't. Then the other thing is, people look very different when they're wet. And so I do this casting. I have a list, maybe of the 30 people that come down, maybe 7 I think will work. And then throughout the season, I just, in June, I'll just book them for the season for certain shoots, because I don't shoot back to back. It's not like a week of shooting. It's 2 weeks, then 2 weeks off to think about it, assess, and go at it again. For the studio work, there's one agent in particular. I think it's really important to know, if you're using modeling agencies, to know if they understand your aesthetic. And because I have a fashion aesthetic that is combined with art, usually they give me, it doesn't really work out, but there is one person in Toronto that I don't even have to, I can just tell them I'm shooting on Wednesday and I need a certain ethnic whatever, and they'll come and they'll be fantastic. And I'm so enjoying this relationship, but it's off and on, and people move around a lot. The other thing is Toronto is a jumping off point for most models. So if they're good, they won't be there next week or next month. So you have to be adaptable.
And then do you use the same technique with the flowers you take underwater, like the photographic technique? Is it the same as with the models, or do you have to do something different?
Yes, I lit them. I have underwater lights, and
You said you're on the bottom. In that, you're in the bottom of the pool.
I'm on the bottom, but
Looking up.
when I'm shooting the women, I change my position all the time.
Did you ask about the flowers?
Yes, about the technique,
Okay.
like
On
the actual
flowers, the
photographic.
technique is interesting. I shot the first series of flowers one summer, and then in September I started editing them, and I ended up seeing something by accident within the edit that I really liked, from a way I hadn't shot for the rest of the series. So I trashed that series, and next summer went back at it and shot. What I ended up loving was not the
actual flower, but its reflection on the, so I was lying on the floor of the pool, looking up at its reflection on the underside of the water. And so I went to town. The next season I had my focus. I knew what I wanted to do.
So please stick around. I run 10 minutes late. Sorry. I'd like to get you out of here in an hour. So it's an hour and 10, except we also have books. And Joyce would be happy to do a book signing. So
Barbara.
And it's just sort of hot off the press. So I thank you all for coming. Again, you guys mean the world to us, and this is what we do here. We do, and hoping, and just that people so nice like you will come and take advantage of this.
And
So thank you.
Thank you too very, very much for coming to hear the talk. It means the world to an artist. So thank you.